Really appreciate you obviously jumping on this. I know you're super busy, which we were just discussing. But yeah, obviously we've had a couple of chats now, but for those maybe who aren't as familiar with what you're doing, would you be able to give us a really quick sort of introduction into yourself?
Sure. So I'm Lydia Hawthorn. I'm delivery director at Cprime, which is a specialist agile tech tooling and transformation consultancy.
Yeah.
And I've spent the last 5 or 6 years really specializing in product delivery and leading internal transformations inside brands. And before that, I started off in agile delivery within the cybersecurity sector. Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking to you today.
I guess high level, could you give us a bit of an overview in terms of what you do day to day, really, as a direct, senior director?
Yeah, so my role is really about bringing 3 strands of the business together: the commercial aspect, the delivery, as well as the solution itself, and basically maintaining that we're doing a really great job across all 3 of those things. So for the client, I want to make sure that what we've said we're delivering is what we're delivering.
Yeah.
From a solution perspective, I want to make sure that it's creating real impactful change, and that's probably one of the most important roles that I play, is making sure that actually the activity that's going on within the client is achieving what we're hoping it will.
Yeah.
And from a commercial perspective, I want to make sure that we're providing the client with consistent value, that we're able to support in any area of their business. A lot of the time people may know us for one of the things that we do, whether we've done some tooling partnership, we've done a migration for them, we've put a tech team in, or we've provided agile coaching and consultancy, but very rarely for all of those things. And so those conversations are often happening within the client portfolio that I look after. And I also line manage the delivery managers within Cprime, so making sure that across the portfolio of work they're working on, that they're happy, that they're consistently delivering to a high standard, and that we're doing delivery really well.
Well, that explains why you're so busy then. So that definitely makes sense. Cool. And I guess you had a slightly atypical route into kind of agile delivery. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about your kind of agile journey and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so I did a degree in English literature and creative writing at Nottingham, because I just thought I'm going to go and do something that I really enjoy. And I did that, not knowing at all what I wanted to go into. And when I first graduated, I went and got a job within like the sales function at a recruitment company. And that recruitment company worked across almost every sector, but particularly within tech. And whilst recruitment wasn't the right fit for me, it gave me such a broad exposure to so many elements of what it takes to run a business, how tech companies work, the sorts of strategies that businesses are looking at when they're growing. And from there, I went directly into tech consultancy, firstly in the legal sector, then in cybersecurity. And then when I was ready to actually launch and not just necessarily be a scrum master and a coach, but going to run transformations myself, really it always came from the position of this sort of ghost role that delivery is. I'd always been in these positions that it was really hard to articulate what it was we were doing as an agile delivery manager or a scrum master, but all everyone knew is that when we weren't there, things fell apart.
Yeah.
And really that's why I've tried to carve my career out of this delivery space, because I feel that the personnel that lend themselves so well to these sorts of roles are often overlooked or struggle to find their place elsewhere in an organization. And I just caught the bug for transformation, really. I loved seeing it work. I loved having to creatively problem solve when faced with challenges where things weren't changing as fast as we'd have liked. That's sort of how it led for me to come full circle and come back into consultancy, having been in-house, and come back to the dark side, really.
I was going to ask actually, do you think that slightly atypical intro or background, I should say, in terms of getting you into delivery, do you think that has been a benefit to you, and maybe in terms of how you view problems, or the fact you do have a different set of soft skills, I guess, to maybe more technical people who've got into that role?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everybody would like to say that their background definitely gives them an edge and everything else. I think what I try to point out to people who, if I'm mentoring or if I'm doing some of the scale coaching stuff, I try to emphasize that regardless of whether it added or not, it certainly didn't detract. And we want to see diversity in all realms, right? We want to see it in a space that's not just diversity of the individuals, but also their backgrounds, where they come from, the lessons that they might be borrowing from other roles that they've done. And I really, when I first started out in recruitment, the recruitment company that I worked for, we did not CV check. We purely checked for competencies around what would make them good for the role. And that was primarily because we were recruiting into junior positions. But it's something that really stuck with me because I saw how impactful people could be inside businesses without having had a specific degree or a background in that particular area. And so when it came to then starting to build my own teams, I always prefer to build talent organically by hiring maybe at a more junior level. And yes, they might not have the context, the deep in-depth knowledge of the product, but that can always be taught. What I can't teach somebody is to be naturally curious, to be a diplomat, somebody who's really driven by problem solving and helping others. Those are the sorts of things that really are only like competency based, are built inherently into that person. And I was all of those things very naturally. So it felt like I found my place once I started falling into those delivery roles. It was like, yes, this is where I can use my skills to the best of my ability.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess that kind of leads us quite nicely onto the next one then. So I think particularly around like the skills gap, which I think is probably going in the wrong direction, unfortunately. But do you think a university degree is essential in terms of moving into the tech space, or what's your view on that?
I don't think it's completely necessary. No, I mean, we're talking about the tech space as a holistic thing, when in actual fact, yes, of course, there are roles that require deep technical knowledge, but whether that's acquired through going to university or it's acquired because you've just been doing the job a long time, I think is kind of irrelevant. I think generally as well, if we're not even talking about university, but we're talking about qualifications, there is a slight movement within the industry shifting away from people needing to have specific qualifications and credentials. It's not to diminish the value of them, it's to give other people an opportunity to say, somebody can pass an exam at any time. And half of the challenge of being a coach and a scrum master in particular is having the experience to problem solve when you've seen things on the ground. So a scrum master should be the calm in everyone else's storm. A coach should be the person who is able to hold space for whatever the challenges that you're facing. And really, it doesn't matter how many qualifications you have, unless you've seen that in real life, you've been at the coalface, you've had experience of seeing these things and knowledge of how other teams have gone about addressing them. It doesn't really matter how many credentials that you've got. So I would always favor experience over a qualification, but that isn't, as I said, to diminish the value of those things if they're important to you. And I think there's space for both. I think there's enough to go around.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. So next thing, I know supporting women who are parents, supporting women who are parents in the workplace is really important to you. What do you think, I suppose tech companies in particular, but I suppose it does apply to the wider space, but what do you think companies can do better to support women as they return to work after having a baby?
Yeah, I think that this was a really personal sort of fight for me. I experienced quite significant postpartum depression after I had my son. And I was really lucky that the company I was employed with at the time, I don't think they even necessarily realized like quite how supportive that they were. But there were certain things that on reflection they did that without it, I would have struggled even more than I already was.
Wow.
So a couple things were like when I returned to work, well, everybody as they returned to work was offered 3 sessions of maternity coaching. Maternity coaching is certainly becoming more popular, but there's still plenty of people who don't realize it's out there. And it sort of does exactly what it says on the tin. It's providing you with a coach who can help walk you through the challenges of migrating back into the workplace now having been becoming a parent, because you will be facing your own demons, as well as sort of this this sense that you might be perceived differently in the workplace, and also juggling so much more. You know, we all, working parents, will all know the horror of like your kid having a temperature the morning of your biggest presentation or what have you. So those maternity coaching sessions were totally invaluable, and I'd really recommend that businesses look at solutions like that more, because I think quite often, whilst it's super important to make sure that your parental leave policy is generous and allows that person the time that they need to go and be a parent before returning to work, it's not the only way to provide support. So maternity coaching was fantastic. We also had like a buddy scheme where when you rejoined the workforce, there was somebody given to you as your buddy who was also a working parent. And even if it was just being able to ask them, like, how did you apply for your tax-free childcare account, or being able to swap the horror stories about the fact that your kid's off sick and they've got the chicken pox, that just made you feel really seen, really heard. But probably the third and final thing I will say is, I really encourage managers and HR professionals to have the conversation about flexible working policies proactively. And by that, I don't just mean have the conversation as soon as possible. I mean, make it clear to the individual that whilst you're not able to promise anything, you can't guarantee anything unless they make a formal request.
Yeah.
That they are open to you making those requests. I think a lot of friends of mine who've had children, other colleagues, they don't want to raise the idea of coming back on a flexible working schedule, whether that's reduced hours, maybe that's 5 and 4, maybe it's working 5 days, but you're just cutting your day a little bit shorter and doing some work in the evenings. It really just does depend on the individual. And I don't think people feel comfortable asking, because they again think that it might be perceived in a way that is impacts on them negatively. So I would just really encourage people to have those conversations proactively, so people know that you're open to hearing from them, and that you're only asking really so that you can advocate on their behalf, so that they have the best return to work experience that they can have.
Yeah. So first of all, I really appreciate you being quite candid and open about that. I think that's exactly what this is here to do, and to kind of, I guess, you're obviously hugely successful, and I think that you can go through that. I think obviously will help reassure people who've gone through that. So yeah, thank you so much. The other thing as well, just I guess for me, obviously I'm looking at this purely from the recruitment angle. So the headline things is always how long is it and what I'm going to get paid when I'm on maternity leave, and actually, that the additional stuff you talked through there is something that I haven't thought about. So yeah, maybe that's a really useful thing for me, and I guess it's certainly on the recruitment side and maybe company side in terms of, yes, what can we offer it as on top of just more leave and more generous leave. So yeah, really appreciate both of those points. The other thing I was going to ask, so next then, so as a woman in tech, what sort of challenges have you or barriers have you faced? And I mean, fingers crossed there isn't any, but I imagine that probably isn't the case. So
yeah, I mean, look, I'm sure that everybody has a fairly let's just say, I think that there's a shared experience of most women in tech, which is that you are most likely going to have been working in an environment where you are a minority because you are a woman. But that's not to say that there are not pockets of areas within tech that you tend to find more women, and actually delivery is one of them. Agile delivery managers, more and more coaches, scrum masters, we're seeing that balance shift. And I think that certainly helped me feel like I'm not so unique in a way that makes me stick out. What I will say is that I have, when working in sort of head of product delivery roles, when I'm leading transformations, see, I'm going to be working with engineering teams, DevOps teams, and they traditionally have more men than women. And I think the challenge there is actually knowing that you turned up every day, doing the absolute best that you could do. Your capability is high, but it doesn't necessarily always mean things are going to go your way. And by that, I also mean that you won't always be sure whether something went your way or not based on your gender.
Yeah.
Something might, and this is quite how subtle the challenges of being a woman in the workplace can be. Sometimes they can be very overt, but they can be very subtle too, where you think, did somebody ask me, oh, hi, how are you? How's the little one? Did they ask me that because I'm a woman, or did they ask me that because they genuinely are invested in how my kid is, And
Yeah.
sometimes those small things chip away more so than the big things. So I'm asking myself at that point, well, would that person have asked a man, hey, how's your little one? Very, very possibly, but all of a sudden you're tied up in your own head about
Yeah.
the root of the nature of a question that's being asked of you.
Mhm.
Gendered language also really gets to me. People calling large groups of people guys, for example, really frustrates me, because people will say, oh, it's not gendered language, it's gender neutral. But if someone asks like a guy, a straight male, oh, hey, how many guys have you dated? They would most definitely not find it a neutral term.
Yeah.
And so we really need to do better at holding individuals accountable, and not in an accusatory way, not in a combative way. Again, this is sort of the additional burden of being a woman in the workplace, especially when there's
Yeah.
a higher percentage of men, is that whilst it shouldn't be your responsibility to advocate for other women, or to pull people up when they might be saying things in a way that could be misconstrued. Um, Unfortunately, it is. And if we don't take some responsibility each as individuals, you can quite quickly find yourself feeling like you've been the target of comments or actions
Yeah.
that you then didn't have the chance to voice your feelings about, which leads to resentment and bitterness.
Yeah. I mean, again, like certainly the guys thing, I think that's 100% one I'm guilty of. So I think that's something that I'm absolutely going to try and go away and reflect on, and yeah, try and be a bit more. Well, we'll try and cut that out of my language. I've never heard it articulated that way, but when you say it like that, you go, oh, of course. So yeah, again, really appreciate that. So in terms of your career, then, what are your proudest moments, both professionally and personally, so far?
Yeah, so far. So I think the work I did at Tech Nation, I'm incredibly proud of. That I built a team there. So I went into that role. I had 3 people who were reporting to me.
Mhm.
And there were quite some significant political dynamics as I entered that role, in the sense that a couple of them had gone for the role and not got it. And I was brought in to transform, right? So like, you're not always the most popular person when you're essentially a disruptor.
Mhm.
Um, and 2 of that team left very quickly. I was left with 1 individual in that team who reported to me, and then I had to build a team from scratch. And within the space of 9 months, I built that team from 1 to 13 individuals. It's the
Oh
largest
wow.
team I've ever line managed. I line managed each of them individually. So that's and guys, don't do what I've said, right? 13 is too many people. You should not be line managing 13 direct reports. Um, but I was really proud, because even after I left Tech Nation and my time was done there on the transformation, I saw those individuals continue to thrive, continue to be the absolute like rocks within that organization.
Mhm.
And they went on to be promoted into more senior roles, to lead programs there, and on to other bigger and better things, even if they moved on from Tech Nation. And I felt like there was legacy there in what I did. So I was really, really proud of that. And personally, I mean, obviously, I alluded to it earlier about having postpartum depression, but that for me was, just looking back, such an achievement that I got myself out of that. I'm not saying I did, I went to therapy and I had support from my friends and family, but
Mhm.
it takes a lot of yourself to wake up every day and do the work,
Yeah.
to basically undo and pick apart this like feeling of being depressed, and why am I depressed, and understanding yourself and listening to your body and listening to what you need, and turning up for yourself more and caring for yourself more, and at the same time trying to be a wife, a friend, a daughter, a sister, a mum, myself,
Yeah,
as a human being. And I think I would just urge anybody who's struggling really to look deep within you and say, like, but what am I doing to like turn up for myself every day, to hold space for myself when I need it, to set boundaries. And I'm so proud of myself for doing that,
yeah,
because that is harder than anything else I've actually ever done. I'd rather
yeah,
give birth 10 times over than have to be depressed again and
yeah,
figure my way out of it, because it's a very lonely time no matter how many people you have around you,
yeah,
because only you really understands what's going on in your head. So
yeah,
yeah, I will forever be very proud of
yeah.
29-year-old, 30-year-old Lydia for going through that process.
Absolutely, and I guess, and I'm going to hold my hands up. I'm a little bit naive to it. It's not something that I'm ever going to personally suffer. But in terms of maybe someone who is going to go through that, how long did it take? How long were the symptoms, or how long were the signs there before you sought help and were maybe open
Yeah.
about it?
It's so I have a talk that I do on this exact topic. It's called A
Okay.
Glitch in the Code, like a tech gal's experience of navigating postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And I wrote this talk for a long time before I actually delivered it. And looking back, I was depressed almost immediately, but
Yeah.
because you have the baby blues and you're like, well, at what point does that turn into depression? And the timing was just so terrible, because I had my son at the end of 2019 and he was 5 months old
Yeah.
when the pandemic hit. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
like everybody was a bit depressed during the pandemic, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't go anywhere, you can't see your friends and family. We didn't live near any family at all, so we did not have the luxury, even pre or post pandemic, of having a grandparent have him one night a week or come and take you know childcare duties off us for
Yeah.
an afternoon. And so everything just felt very, very, very relentless. And there was no change. Up in Manchester and like in the Northwest, we had almost no reprieve from the lockdowns either. We were significantly locked down for longer periods of time than almost anywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
So not being able to take your child to a baby class or to swimming or anything that changed your day to day meant
Mhm.
that what might have started as a window of depression that might have ended
Yeah.
just
It's
rolled on
compounded.
and
Yeah.
on and on and on and on. So actually, I didn't really realize I was depressed until I started to come out of it. And
Okay.
that was probably a solid 18 months
Oh,
to nearly
wow.
2 years. And I think my husband saw the signs, but again, he didn't really know what to look for, or
Mm.
not to look for, but to say, how to articulate it. Because actually, the worst thing you can do to a new first time mum who's sleep deprived and is having problems like breastfeeding and all of this stuff, and they're in pain, is to say, like, do you think you're depressed? Like they're going to get
Yeah.
defensive straight away, because of course
Yeah.
you don't want to be depressed. So the last thing you want to do is admit that maybe you are. And
Yeah.
so it was a word I really genuinely did not resonate with for a really long time. And even after I started coming out of it, I didn't really want to say to people I had depression or I was depressed, because it's a stigma then that I've had that thing has happened to me. And no matter what, I can never not have that label,
Yeah.
even in my own mind, even if other people aren't thinking that. So yeah, it was about 18 months. I was really lucky again at Tech Nation. They had something called Spill. There's another company like it called Mind Up, which actually a friend of mine founded, where they're sort of corporate solutions for mental health. So they'll sell packages. And another thing I
Yeah.
talk about in the talk that I deliver, because I'm very keen to make sure that we're not just talking about I was depressed and this is how it felt, but here are some genuine things I think others
Yeah.
could be doing to support people better. And one thing about Spill was everybody in the company could access up to 6 sessions of mental health support from a therapist free of charge.
Yeah.
So I think calling mental health support out separately from the private healthcare plan can be really useful, because it
Mhm.
shows the employees in the business that they're being prioritized, like your mental health should be a priority.
Yeah.
But also by making it a blanket, there's no blocking of access to that. It's a blanket policy. Everybody
Yeah.
gets sessions for free, and you just filled in like an online form so that they could match you to the right sort of therapist.
Yeah.
And when I did that, they got back in touch. They were like, so, we'd like to match you with somebody who has experience with depression and anxiety and postnatal. And I was like, what? I thought maybe, yeah, I'd be anxious, because like who wasn't anxious, right?
Yeah.
When they're juggling a 1-year-old and like the world is shutting down and all of this other stuff. But it was really like an eye-opener for me. And those sessions initially were what I needed to open myself up to the fact that I needed therapy.
Yeah.
And then after that, I continued to pay for them myself.
Mhm.
So that was really the turning point for me.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Well, I think one thing I've taken away from this is just how open you are. I think it's brilliant, but also I think it sounds like you have been at good companies who've been able to provide that support. And I think actually that is a sign that at least some organisations are moving in the right direction. So yeah, that's obviously hugely positive. Cool. So next then, obviously we're just kind of kicking off Q2, or it sounds like you're just finishing off Q1. But what are your plans again, like inside and outside of work? What are you looking to do in the rest of the year? And
yeah, so I the theme for the rest of my year really is like stabilizing and then growth. So I see like this first phase is me really bedding into my client accounts, into that portfolio of clients that I look after, making sure that I'm setting their expectation of what level of service they can expect from me and my team.
yeah,
I think like at Cprime, we organize people into CSTs, so like customer success teams, which are kind of like mini scrum teams in the sense that they're cross-functional. So you'll have somebody from sales, somebody like a DM, a delivery manager.
yeah,
You'll have the person who's like leading on the delivery and the strategy, and then you might have somebody from learning if there's a significant amount of learning within the account, so like training that's happening, or somebody from tech and tooling if they're taking a tooling partner or licensing from us, or migration work. And those CSTs, we operate as little scrum teams, basically making sure we're setting our objectives, that we're taking actions towards achieving them. So certainly like bedding into my own customer success teams and making sure that they're well-oiled machines, but also being able to sort of map a bit better for our delivery managers where they can go and where they can progress to. I think that's one thing that I'd like to be able to document a little bit better for them, not in a way that it's prescriptive, because I think you can go too far with that stuff. But I think it's really important that you give people an idea of where they can take a role, and also what capabilities you not just require of them, but really value the most. What if you are operating at the absolute top of your game, what sort of characteristics are you displaying on a day-to-day basis?
yeah,
So those for me are some things I'd like to focus on in my personal life. Like I sort of put out into the universe maybe 18 months ago now to do more public speaking, to get back on the speaker circuit. I had done stuff before I had my son, and throughout the pandemic, no events happened anyway.
yeah,
So it was sort of time for me to get back out there. And since then, it's just been a steady flow, really. So I'm actually going to be on a panel at the Chief Disruptor UK conference in May. And I do podcasts, I do speaking events in person, I do stuff like this. I'm a scale coach for the Enterprise City program, the exchange program at Enterprise City, which is supporting founders, tech founders, in how to scale their businesses. I'm an ambassador for Innovate Her, helping encourage younger women to get into tech. So all of that for me, I want to do more of, and the more opportunities I get to do it, the better.
Yeah, there's a lot of plates for you to spin by the sounds of it, but you seem to be managing it really well. So what makes you happiest in your free time?
Oh, in my free time. Well, obviously spending time with my son. I think that he's at an age now, he's like 3, nearly 3.5, and
Yeah.
I was not. I was not one of those parents that was like, I love every age. You know, they get better and better. I was like, please tell me that this gets better and easier and I'll enjoy this more. And I think, like, as an aside, just I think that people are really scared when they're parents to admit that they don't necessarily love the job of being a parent. I love my son and I love who he is and that I'm his mum. But the role and job of being a parent is not one that I'm like super enthused by, or that
Yeah,
I see as like a hobby of mine that I want to excel at. So that they can, you know, be quite combative feelings to have. But he's at that age now where he's like so switched on, so funny without even really realizing it. So hanging
hmm
out with him, you know, my husband and I both really consciously made the choice in the last year to be slower in our life,
okay,
to just not constantly be doing something where we're having to travel away for a weekend, or we're not able just to exist in our
yeah,
house and in the area that we live and go and do like the normal things that you would do on a weekend, like go swimming or take him to a skateboarding lesson or something. So we're a lot more present over the last 12 months, and that's something that I've been really enjoying. But also my friends, I have a really, really strong friendship group. We
hmm
all have started sort of having children now. We've all had boys. So there is a five-a-side football team ready to go. Um, well, if they were girls, they could play the football too. But you know, that for me, I lived when I was younger in a lot of different places because my dad was in the army,
hmm
and I see a great amount of beauty in just existing in one place,
yeah.
not always going here and there. But yeah, that's sort of the theme of how I'm spending my spare time at the minute.
Okay, cool. Um, Always a bit of a tricky one. This in one sentence, how would you describe your career so far? We can have quite
Mm.
a long sentence if you'd like.
Well, I think the thing is that with these questions, you always immediately go to sort of what would other people describe it as?
Yeah.
And other people might describe my career as like, oh, you know, fast paced, determined, um, hard work ethic. To me, my career has felt inevitable. I have always felt like this is where I wanted to be and this is
hmm
where I would get to. It was just a matter of time. So inevitable would be one. Um, Impatient would be another, you know, not just in transformation roles, but I will say it is more prevalent in this space. Is pace is a really important concept. Pace to match how quickly your client or your company can keep up with transformation. The pace at which you're able, with your own capability, to change things for the better. And pace is something I've always felt like speed is more important. Like quick, rapid, the
Yeah.
faster the better. And it's a big lesson I had to learn throughout my 20s, really, is haste does not always equal speed. You know,
Yeah.
and sometimes taking a little bit more time to wait for somebody to be on the same page as you, to wait for yourself to catch up to where you think you are. You know, that
Yeah.
self-perception piece of like, why am I not there? I'm there, but they don't think I'm there. Well, sometimes it's because you're actually not. You just want to be there and you're not yet. And I
Yeah.
have, you know, been in a position where I was gunning for promotion. I end up in a more senior role and I wasn't ready for it and I
Yeah.
floundered and it wasn't the right choice.
Yeah.
So I suppose yeah, inevitable, impatient, or maybe I should just be a bit fairer on myself and say pacey. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll say pacey, inevitable, pacey, um, and wonderful, like
Yeah.
really, really wonderful. Like
Yeah.
I've loved so many of the places I've worked and so many of the people I've worked with. I
Yeah.
think one thing, like everybody, I would really encourage you to ask yourselves is like, do you work around people who impress you?
Yeah.
And if you don't, leave. Being
Yeah.
around impressive people will make even your hardest days better, because you'll know that it's probably hard because you're learning and gaining new skills, and that's because your expectations are so high because you're working with people who just are fantastic at what they do.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've never regretted going to work around impressive people.
Awesome. Just one thing I guess would be really useful in terms of like digging a bit deeper. First of all, like admitting maybe that you got promoted before you should, I think is, yeah, a lot of people do lack that awareness. So now I appreciate obviously your career has moved on probably since that point, but how do you know now when you're ready for that next step? What's the signs? What can people take from that?
Yeah, I think God loves a trier, right? So I've always been a trier. I've always been the sort of person that, like, I'm pretty sure I can give it a go at least once, right? So that I don't ever want to not be that.
Yeah.
But what I look for now is whether I share it with the individual, like with my line manager or whoever's interviewing me or whatever,
Yeah.
whether I share it with them or not, I need to tell myself, yeah, but Lydia, at what cost?
Yeah.
What is the cost of taking on that thing that you're not sure you can do? You're not sure.
Yeah.
You're sure you can try, but you're not sure you can do it. You're
Mhm.
hoping that once you try, you'll figure it out. And history has confirmed that to me, that I always do figure it out. But what
Yeah.
is the cost? The cost is usually to my ability to enter a role confidently. So that leads to anxiety, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
But it also prevents me from being able to make a very true and honest first impression. Because when people are taking on more than they can chew,
Yeah.
or even if it's just a perceived sense in their own mind about their ability to do it, they act out of fear, not confidence. They make decisions out of the fear that they're not going to be able to follow through on a
Yeah.
promise that they've made.
Mhm.
And decisions made out of fear, first impressions that you are putting forward out of fear, they end up really, they're masks, right? They're
Yeah.
there to try and convince everyone else that you should be there.
Yeah.
It's the imposter syndrome, like, the big question at the center of it is like, do I deserve to be here? And do people believe that?
Yeah.
And what I found is that makes me, we talk about like incompetencies, you having the high road and the low road. So my impatience, for example, when it feeds me positively, my
Yeah.
impatience is pace. Is like I can take action where others struggle to. I'm the one that can make gains where others have not been able to. But
Yeah.
it also means that when somebody isn't matching my pace, I can be impatient and I can seem demanding and I can seem like I'm not listening. So this high road, low road thing, when you're taking on more than you can chew without being really sure you can do it, is, for me anyway, the first impression I leave tends to be a little bit more aggressive than I am naturally,
Yeah.
because I'm operating out of fear, not out of confidence. And so
Okay.
that's always what I'm asking myself when I'm
Yeah.
taking on new responsibilities now.
Okay. Yeah. I think that again would be really useful for people watching and listening. So that's great. So next one, what era would you live in, past, present, or future? Or
Yeah. So I this is totally like not because I think it would be the most amazing era,
yeah.
but this is something that has been with me since I was a very young child. My birthday is the 14th of April, which is the date that the Titanic sank.
Okay.
And whether I was a morbid child or what, but my parents let me watch the Titanic when I was about 6. So I was very young.
Yeah.
No idea why they thought that was a good idea. But watching the Titanic, I was like, this ship sank on my birthday, and I'm pretty sure I was on the ship. I was on the
Okay.
ship in a past life,
Yeah.
and I was upset by like my 6th or 7th birthday. I had a Titanic cake that was like
Oh wow.
sinking.
Yeah.
I would like read books about the Titanic. My parents would come into my bedroom and I'd be in floods of tears, and they'd be like, "What's wrong?" Like, there just weren't enough lifeboats, like it really affected me. So
Yeah.
I'm going to slightly cheat and reword the question and say, what era did you live in? And I'm pretty certain in a past
Yeah.
life I was on the Titanic. So
I
it's going to have to be 1912. Very specific.
was not expecting that. I tell you what I saw actually, just on that note the other day, I saw a bouncy castle that was shaped like the Titanic sinking, and people weren't sure whether that was in good taste.
Yeah.
which I wouldn't normally have brought up, but obviously given your fascination with it, I thought I'd mention that. So finally then, what's your favorite quote? And this can be something you live and work by. It could be something, you know, your neighbor said, or something from wherever, really. But
Yeah, I had to think about this because as a literature student, my love of words sometimes makes it very difficult just to pick one quote.
yeah,
But there's a Katharine Hepburn quote, and it's, if you obey all the rules, you miss out all the fun. And I've always sort of liked this mentality of I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission.
yeah,
And again, in the line of work that I'm in, the type of businesses that have hired me,
yeah,
innovation has always been like a big part of their differentiator, the thing that has been their USP.
yeah,
And I like finding myself in innovative environments where I have the freedom to try new things without fear of repercussion.
yeah,
But that doesn't always mean that people know that about you. And some people are scared and in an innovative environment, in this idea that like are trying something different and new that isn't, there's no like rationale behind or sort of evidence to say it's going to work.
yeah.
So yeah, just I would encourage people to challenge the status quo a little bit more often. I think especially as a woman in tech, when I'm on panels or I'm at events and I'm getting asked questions, I usually get the best responses when my answers have challenged somewhat what the person before me said, or what the person who asked the question meant by asking it.
Yeah.
So, whilst I'm not encouraging everyone just to stop listening to whatever their boss is telling them to do, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes the rules are there to be broken. And I think that that is one way to make yourself stand out. If
Mhm.
you're doing it in good faith, you're doing it intent, like with a good intent behind it, you're never
Yeah.
really going to go that far wrong, you know?
Okay.
Um, and at the very least, you turn around and say, yeah, it wasn't the right call, but here's what I've learned. And this is what I'm going to do differently next time. And that leads to a really great growth mindset. It leads to a very low fear of failure, seeing failure as a fail, you know, and not
Yeah.
as a lesson learned. And yeah, it gives you a bit of perspective in life and in work, which I appreciate.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to finish. And yeah, I really appreciate that, Lydia. So thanks very much for your time.